Lieutenant Tyson stood at the viewport of the horizon's edge, arms crossed, watching the endless black between stars with the kind of smug satisfaction only a decorated officer could manage. 3 years on deep space patrol, 2 commendations for tactical excellence, and a reputation that preceded him through every corridor of the ship. He was, by all accounts, untouchable, which made what happened next all the more entertaining. "Attention, Corporal Holly. Report to Containment Bay 5 for special assignment." The announcement crackled through the mess hall during breakfast shift, and every head turned toward the young woman sitting alone near the viewport. Holly looked up from her meal, fork suspended halfway to her mouth, confusion flickering across her face, before she carefully set down her utensils and stood. Tyson, who happened to be holding court at the officers' table, because of course he was, perked up immediately. His radar for potential entertainment was finely tuned, and special assignments during breakfast rarely meant anything good. "Containment Bay 5?" Lieutenant Marks said beside him, barely suppressing a grin. "Isn't that where they're keeping those confiscated creatures?" "Oh, this is going to be good," Tyson replied, already pushing back from the table. By the time Holly arrived at Containment Bay 5, a small crowd had gathered. Word traveled fast on a ship where entertainment options consisted of recycled movies, card games, and making your own fun at someone else's expense. Commander Phillips stood at the entrance, datapad in hand, expression neutral in that way that meant someone was about to have a really bad time. "Corporal Holly," Phillips said without preamble, "you're being reassigned from your current xenobiology research duties." Holly straightened. "Sir, may I ask why?" "Disciplinary reassignment. Effective immediately, you're responsible for the care, feeding, and monitoring of the 3 Keelani juveniles we confiscated last week. Duration, 30 rotations." Someone in the crowd, it might have been Tyson, it probably was Tyson, snorted. Holly's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Understood, sir. What are the care parameters?" "Everything you need is in the file." Phillips transferred the data to her personal device. "They require feeding 4 times per rotation, environmental enrichment, and constant monitoring. You'll be sleeping in the adjacent quarters. Any questions?" "No, sir." "Dismissed." The crowd parted as Holly walked toward the containment bay doors, and that's when Tyson made his move. He always did have a gift for timing. "Hey, Holly!" he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Babysitting duty? What did you do? Forget to file someone's paperwork?" A few people laughed. Holly stopped but didn't turn around. Tyson warmed to his audience. 30 rotations of diaper changes and bottle feeding. That's got to be a new low, even for you. He paused for effect. "Maybe if you'd spent less time questioning protocols and more time following orders, you'd still be doing actual work." There it was. The real reason, delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Holly turned slowly, and for just a moment, something sharp flashed in her expression. Something that suggested she had plenty to say, and the vocabulary to say it. But then, her face smoothed into careful neutrality. "At least I'll be working with creatures that have the capacity to learn, sir," she said quietly, and walked through the containment doors before Tyson could formulate a response. The crowd dispersed, chuckling and murmuring, already composing messages to friends on other shifts about Holly's public humiliation. Tyson accepted congratulations on his wit like a performer taking bows, but somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered if that last comment had been an insult. He dismissed it. What was she going to do? Train alien cubs to do her homework? Inside Containment Bay 5, Holly pressed her back against the closed doors and took a long, steadying breath. 30 rotations. 30 rotations of being the ship's joke, while Tyson walked around like he owned the place. All because she'd had the audacity to report his breach of quarantine protocols last month. He'd been careless, rushing through contamination procedures because he had a poker game to get to. She'd filed the proper documentation. Command had buried it. Now here she was. "Well," she said to the empty room, "let's see what I'm working with." The containment area was larger than she'd expected, about 30 meters square, with climate controls, various terrain features, and a reinforced observation window. And there, in the far corner, were the cubs. 3 of them, each about the size of a large dog, with tawny fur that shifted through shades of gold and amber depending on how the light hit them. They had leonine features, broad faces, rounded ears, powerful shoulders, but their eyes were startlingly intelligent, more primate than predator. They watched her approach with alert curiosity, not fear. "Hello," Holly said softly, crouching down to their level outside the enclosure. "I'm Holly. I guess we're roommates now." The largest of the 3, a female, according to the file, tilted her head and made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a purr. The other 2, both males, pressed closer to the female, watching Holly with identical expressions of intense focus. Holly pulled up the file on her datapad. Minimal information: species name, estimated age, 6 months, equivalent to human toddlers. Behavioral notes that consisted mostly of playful and curious and no signs of aggression. The creatures had been confiscated from a smuggling vessel operating near the outer fringe colonies. Destination: unknown. Purpose: unknown. The smugglers weren't talking. "Playful and curious," Holly read aloud. "Well, that's something." She spent the next hour reviewing the care protocols, setting up the feeding schedule, and familiarizing herself with the monitoring equipment. The cubs watched everything she did with rapt attention, occasionally communicating with each other in soft chirps and low rumbles that almost sounded like conversation. When she finally entered the enclosure for the first feeding, the cubs approached cautiously. The female first, bold and confident, sniffing Holly's extended hand before bumping her head against Holly's palm. The 2 males followed, less certain but equally curious, and within minutes, all 3 were climbing over her like she was the most interesting piece of furniture they'd ever encountered. Holly couldn't help but smile. Whatever else this assignment was, at least her charges were adorable. "You 3 are going to get me through 30 rotations with my sanity intact," she told them, scratching behind the female's ears. "Aren't you?" The female made that chirping purr again and looked at Holly with eyes that seemed far too knowing for a simple animal. Outside the containment bay, Tyson passed by the observation window on his way to the bridge. He glanced inside, saw Holly sitting cross-legged on the floor with 3 alien cubs crawling all over her, and shook his head. Babysitting duty. Exactly what she deserved. He continued on his way, whistling, already composing the jokes he'd tell at dinner. This was going to be the gift that kept on giving for the next month. If only he'd looked closer at the cubs. If only he'd seen the way all 3 stopped playing the moment he appeared at the window. If only he'd noticed how they watched him pass, eyes tracking his movement with an intensity that had nothing to do with play. If only he'd realized that Keelani cubs, despite their appearance, were not simple animals at all. But Tyson didn't look closer. He never did. And that, as it turned out, was going to be his first mistake. Holly's first week with the cubs passed in a blur of feeding schedules, cleaning routines, and the kind of exhausting care work that made her previous research duties look like a vacation. She slept in 4-hour increments, woke to the sound of chirping demands for food, and spent her waking hours in the containment bay while the rest of the ship went about its business. Tyson made sure to visit the observation window at least once per rotation, usually with an audience. "Still playing house, Holly?" he'd call through the intercom, or, "How are the babies today?" with exaggerated concern that always drew laughs from whoever he'd brought along. Holly learned to ignore him. What she couldn't ignore was how quickly the cubs were learning. On rotation 4, the female, Holly had started calling her Mika in her head, figured out how to operate the water dispenser by watching Holly do it twice. By rotation 6, both males, Finn and Cole, had learned to open the storage containers where their food was kept. By rotation 8, all three had developed a system of coordinated play that looked suspiciously like strategy. "You're not supposed to be this smart," Holly murmured on rotation 9, watching Mika stack 3 different objects to reach a toy hanging from the ceiling. The behavioral notes said you were equivalent to toddlers. Mika chirped, successfully retrieved the toy, and distributed pieces to her brothers with what looked like deliberate fairness. Holly pulled up the original confiscation report and read it again, more carefully this time. Smuggling vessel. Outer fringe. Destination unknown. She cross-referenced with known smuggling routes and found something interesting. The vessel had been intercepted near Keelani space, which was technically off-limits to human ships without proper authorization. What were smugglers doing in restricted territory? And why would they risk it for 3 cubs? She was still puzzling over it when her personal comm buzzed. A message from Tyson, sent to her and copied to half the ship's personnel. Reminder: Corporal Holly is unavailable for normal duties due to her extended babysitting assignment. Please direct all xenobiology questions to Lieutenant Marks. Holly is busy changing diapers. 12 people had already sent laughing reactions. Holly closed her eyes, counted to 10, then opened them to find all 3 cubs staring at her with identical expressions of what looked like concern. "I'm fine," she told them. "Just dealing with someone who thinks he's funnier than he actually is." Mika made a sound, low, rumbling, almost like a growl. The males echoed it. "Yeah, I don't like him either," Holly admitted, then caught herself. "Wait, do you understand what I'm saying?" All 3 cubs tilted their heads in unison. A chill ran down Holly's spine. She pulled up the xenolinguistics database and ran a search on Keelani communication patterns. The results were sparse. The species was classified as pre-contact, with limited interaction with human space. But what little information existed suggested complex social structures, advanced problem-solving abilities, and possible language comprehension that extended beyond their own species. "Oh," Holly said softly. "Oh, you're not pets at all, are you?" Mika approached and placed one paw on Holly's knee, maintaining eye contact in a way that felt distinctly like communication. Holly spent the rest of that rotation running subtle tests. She gave verbal commands without gestures. She described the location of hidden treats without pointing. She asked simple yes or no questions and watched for responses. The cubs understood at least 60% of what she said. By rotation 12, Holly knew she should report her findings. This was significant xenobiology data, the kind of discovery that could reshape humanity's understanding of the Keelani species. But reporting meant attention, meant command taking interest, meant possibly losing her charges to researchers who'd see them as subjects instead of individuals. And it meant Tyson would find some way to take credit or undermine her work. She decided to wait, to gather more data, to be absolutely certain before she made her report official. That decision saved her life, though she didn't know it yet. Rotation 15 brought the incident that changed everything. Holly was in her quarters, the small room adjacent to the containment bay, trying to catch a few hours of sleep when her door chimed. She checked the time. 0300 hours. Middle of the night by ship standards. "Who is it?" she called groggily. "Lieutenant Tyson, open up." Every nerve in Holly's body went on alert. She pulled on a duty jacket over her sleep clothes and opened the door halfway. Tyson stood in the corridor, uniform slightly disheveled, expression harder than usual. "Can I help you, sir?" Holly kept her voice neutral. "You filed a maintenance request for the containment bay yesterday. Environmental controls acting up, you said." "That's correct. The temperature regulators are running 3 degrees too warm." "I'm denying the request." Tyson leaned against the door frame. Too casual, too close. "Those creatures are hardy. They can handle a little temperature variation." Holly frowned. "With respect, sir, you're not in my chain of command. Maintenance requests go through Commander Phillips." "Phillips delegated maintenance oversight to me last week." Tyson smiled. "Didn't you get the memo?" "Oh, that's right. You've been too busy with babysitting duty to check your official messages." He was lying. Holly could see it in the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers, in the tension around his mouth. But calling a superior officer a liar directly was a good way to extend her punishment from 30 rotations to 60. "I'll take it up with Commander Phillips in the morning," she said carefully. "You do that." Tyson pushed off the doorframe. "One more thing, Holly. I've been reviewing your research files from before your reassignment. Some interesting notes about protocol violations. Specifically, accusations against senior personnel without sufficient evidence." Holly's stomach dropped. Those were properly documented observations filed through appropriate channels. "Were they?" Tyson's smile widened. "Because it looks to me like harassment of a superior officer." "Keep it up. And your next assignment might be cleaning waste recyclers instead of playing with alien puppies." He walked away before Holly could respond, his boots echoing down the empty corridor. Holly closed the door, locked it, and stood there, shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. He was escalating. Whatever game he was playing, he wasn't content with just humiliating her anymore. She checked her messages. No delegation of authority to Tyson. He'd lied about that at least. A soft chirping came from the containment bay. Holly walked through the connecting door and found all 3 cubs pressed against the interior window, staring at the corridor where Tyson had been. "You heard that, huh?" Holly sat down, suddenly exhausted. Mika made that low rumbling sound again, and this time the males joined her. It was definitely a growl, resonant and full of something that sounded like threat, despite their small size. "He's dangerous," Holly told them quietly. "I reported him for cutting corners on decontamination procedures, and now he's trying to bury me. He's got connections, friends in command, and I'm just a corporal who couldn't keep her mouth shut about safety violations." She laughed bitterly. "I should have just let it go. Should have pretended I didn't see anything." Finn pressed his face against the glass, leaving a smudge, and made a soft, questioning sound. "Why didn't I?" Holly considered. "Because people could have gotten hurt. The protocols exist for a reason. Someone cuts corners in xenobiology, and suddenly you've got a contamination event, or an escaped organism, or worse." She met Mika's gaze through the glass. "I know you probably can't understand all this, but it helps to talk about it." All 3 cubs were watching her with that unsettling intensity again. Holly returned to her quarters an hour later, managed to fall into fitful sleep, and woke to her alarm at 0600. Time for the cubs' morning feeding. Except when she entered the containment bay, she found something that made her blood run cold. The reinforced door to the cub's enclosure stood open. Not damaged, not forced, simply open, as though someone had input the proper access code. The cubs were gone. Holly's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Escaped containment. Loose on the ship. Security would be called. They'd be hunted. Possibly killed as threats. Command would blame her. Tyson would have exactly what he needed to destroy her career permanently. She was halfway to the emergency comm when she heard it. Chirping, coming from her quarters. Holly ran through the connecting door and stopped dead. All three cubs sat in the middle of her floor, surrounded by items, objects, things that definitely did not belong to her. A security badge. Tyson's security badge, she realized, seeing his photo on the ID. A personal comm device, also displaying Tyson's identification. 2 data chips. A small metallic object she didn't immediately recognize. And more items, personal effects, uniform pins, even what looked like a physical photograph of Tyson with some other officers. The cubs had arranged everything in a neat pile, almost ceremonial in its precision. Mika chirped and pushed the security badge toward Holly with one paw. "What?" Holly crouched down slowly, afraid to startle them, afraid to believe what she was seeing. "What did you 3 do?" Cole picked up one of the data chips in his mouth and dropped it at her feet. Holly's hands shook as she picked up Tyson's comm device. It was locked, of course, but the fact that it was here, in her quarters, meant the cubs had somehow gotten into Tyson's personal spaces. Which should have been impossible. Tyson's quarters were on a completely different deck, through multiple secured doors, protected by the ship's standard security systems. The cubs shouldn't have been able to navigate the corridors without being seen. Shouldn't have been able to open doors. Shouldn't have been able to identify which quarters belonged to Tyson specifically. "How?" Holly whispered. Mika made a complex series of sounds, chirps, clicks, and that rumbling purr, while maintaining direct eye contact. It sounded exactly like someone trying to explain something complicated. Finn and Cole added their own sounds, overlapping, almost like conversation. Holly sat down hard on the floor, her mind reeling. "You understood everything I said last night. Understood that Tyson is a threat. And you—" She looked at the pile of stolen items. "You went after him. Somehow." The cubs clustered around her, pressing close, radiating warmth and something that felt distinctly like protectiveness. Holly picked up one of the data chips with trembling fingers. Standard military storage, unmarked. Could be anything. Could be nothing. But cubs smart enough to steal Tyson's personal effects were probably smart enough to know these chips were important. She should report this immediately. Should call security. Should admit the cubs had escaped. Instead, she looked at Mika. "Are you trying to help me?" Mika bumped her head against Holly's hand, the same gesture she used when she wanted affection or approval. "This is insane," Holly muttered. But she pocketed the data chips and the security badge. The rest of the items she carefully gathered, mind already racing through the problem. She'd have to return most of this without anyone knowing. Tyson would notice his badge and comm were missing. There'd be an investigation. Unless... Holly checked the time. 06:15. Tyson typically ran in the ship's gym from 06:30 to 07:30, compulsively punctual about his exercise routine. If she moved fast, she could return most items to his quarters before he noticed they were gone. "You 3, she told the cubs, "get back in your enclosure. Now. And we never speak of this again." The cubs chirped in unison and trotted back through the connecting door. Holly stood alone in her quarters, holding stolen items and data chips that might contain evidence of... what? She didn't know, didn't want to know. Except she did. Because maybe, just maybe, three incredibly intelligent alien cubs had just handed her exactly what she needed to fight back. Holly moved through the ship's corridors at 0620, heart-hammering, stolen items concealed in a maintenance kit that gave her a plausible reason to be anywhere. The cubs had somehow avoided every security camera, every patrol route, every possible point of observation during their nighttime excursion. Holly wasn't nearly that skilled. She had to rely on timing, luck, and the fact that most of the crew was either asleep or focused on morning duties. Tyson's quarters were on Deck 3, officer country, where a corporal had no business being at this hour. Holly took the maintenance corridors, the narrow passages used by engineering staff for repairs, and emerged 2 doors down from Tyson's room. She checked her chronometer. 0628. He'd be leaving for the gym any moment. As if summoned by her thoughts, Tyson's door opened. He emerged in gym attire, towel over his shoulder, already heading toward the lift. Holly pressed herself into a doorway alcove, barely breathing, as he passed within 3 meters of her position. The moment he disappeared around the corner, she moved. Tyson's door was locked, naturally, but he'd left his security badge in Holly's quarters, and the ship's emergency override codes were standard across all doors for safety reasons. Holly input the maintenance bypass, technically illegal, definitely career-ending if caught, and slipped inside. The quarters were immaculate. Tyson kept everything regulation perfect, from the made bed to the precisely aligned personal items on his desk. Holly had perhaps 30 minutes before he returned, less if he cut his workout short. She worked quickly, replacing items exactly where the cubs must have taken them from. Comm device on the charging pad. Photograph back in the frame on the shelf. Uniform pins in the drawer. She was sweating by the time she finished, hyper-aware of every sound in the corridor outside. The security badge and data chips she kept. Those were her insurance. Holly made it back to her quarters without incident, locked the door, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of shaking relief before getting to work. The data chips were standard military issue, encrypted but not with high-level security. Holly had research clearance for basic cryptography, necessary for her xenobiology work, and the decryption took less than 15 minutes. What she found made her forget to breathe. The first chip contained transaction records, financial transfers, all coded but clearly showing patterns, regular payments from numbered accounts, dates that corresponded with cargo shipments, route coordinates that matched known smuggling corridors. Tyson had been meticulous about hiding the details, but the pattern was unmistakable. He was selling confiscated xenobiology specimens. The second chip was worse. Personal communications, messages between Tyson and contacts whose names were redacted but whose intentions were crystal clear. Arrangements for special acquisitions, discussions of high-value specimens, complaints about military oversight getting tighter. And one message, dated 6 weeks ago, Keelani juveniles acquired. Buyer willing to pay premium. Recommend immediate transfer before intelligence assessment. Holly read that line 3 times, ice forming in her stomach. The cubs hadn't been confiscated from smugglers. Tyson was the smuggler. He'd planned to sell them before anyone, realized how intelligent they were, before official assessment could classify them as sentient. He'd failed because the ship's commander had ordered them held for study, and now he was stuck with 3 pieces of evidence of his crimes living in containment. And Holly, by sheer bad luck, had become their caretaker. No wonder he'd been escalating his harassment. Every day she spent with the cubs was another day she might discover their intelligence, might report findings that would trigger deeper investigation. He needed her discredited, removed, silenced. Holly's hands shook as she copied the data, encrypted the copies, and hid them in 3 separate locations in the ship's database under innocuous file names. Then she sat back and tried to think. She could go to Commander Phillips right now, present the evidence, but the data was stolen, obtained through illegal entry of a superior officer's quarters. Any decent military lawyer would get it thrown out, and Holly would face charges while Tyson walked free. She needed more, needed corroboration, needed something that proved beyond doubt what Tyson had done. A soft chirping drew her attention. All 3 cubs pressed against the connecting door's window, watching her. Holly walked into the containment bay. "You knew," she said quietly. "Somehow, you knew what he was, what he'd done." Mika made a complex vocalization, and Holly pulled up the xenolinguistics database again, this time searching specifically for Keelani's sensory capabilities. What she found made everything click into place. Keelani possessed olfactory senses far beyond human capacity. They could detect emotional states through biochemical markers, could identify individuals by scent across vast distances, and, most importantly, could sense recent contact between individuals through transferred pheromones and chemical traces. The cubs had smelled Tyson, had smelled, on him, the traces of other Keelani. Adult Keelani. Their parents, perhaps, or their pack. They'd known, from the first moment Tyson entered the containment bay, that he'd been in contact with their people. "You were looking for proof," Holly breathed. "You went into his quarters looking for evidence of what happened to your family." All 3 cubs vocalized at once. A haunting sound, part grief, part rage. Holly made a decision. She opened the enclosure door and sat down among them. "I'm going to help you. But I need you to help me too. Can you do that?" Mika placed one paw on Holly's knee. Finn and Cole pressed close on either side. "Okay," Holly said. "Here's what we're going to do." The next 5 rotations were the longest of Holly's life. Tyson, having discovered his security badge missing despite finding everything else in place, became paranoid. He filed a report claiming possible theft, then mysteriously withdrew it 3 hours later. Holly watched through security feeds as he tore apart his quarters, searching for something, his movements increasingly frantic. He knew the data chips were gone, knew someone had them. Meanwhile, the cubs began their campaign. It started small. Tyson's door would be locked when he tried to enter, requiring maintenance override. His personal comm would experience mysterious connection failures. Food dispensers in his section would malfunction, giving him cold meals or wrong orders. "Are you doing this?" Holly asked the cubs on rotation 18, watching Tyson through the observation feed as he argued with a maintenance technician. Mika chirped innocently. But Holly had noticed the cubs paid intense attention whenever she accessed ship systems on her datapad, watching her input commands, observing the interface. By rotation 20, Tyson was sleeping poorly. Holly could see it in the dark circles under his eyes, the shortness of his temper, the way he snapped at subordinates over minor issues. He'd stopped visiting the observation window, stopped making jokes at Holly's expense. He was too busy dealing with his own problems, problems that multiplied daily. His duty assignments got mixed up, sending him to the wrong decks at the wrong times. His personal files became corrupted. Nothing critical, just annoying. Someone, something, rerouted his messages, creating confusion with other officers. "You're gaslighting him," Holly told the cubs on rotation 22, equal parts horrified and impressed. "You're systematically making him look incompetent." The cubs had somehow gained access to ship systems. Holly didn't know how. They never left containment when she was watching, but the evidence was undeniable. They were intelligent enough to understand computer interfaces, coordinated enough to work together, and motivated enough by whatever had happened to their family to wage a careful, deliberate campaign of psychological warfare. Rotation 25 brought the breakthrough Holly needed. Tyson made a mistake. Exhausted, paranoid, worn down by weeks of inexplicable technical failures, he sent an unencrypted message to one of his buyers, demanding to know why payment for previous merchandise hadn't been received. The message was automatically flagged by the ship's communication monitoring system, standard procedure for any unencrypted external communication. It landed in Commander Phillips's queue for review. Holly, monitoring the situation carefully, watched the commander's face through the office window as he read the message. Watched him go very still. Watched him pull up additional files, cross-reference data, make a secure call to military intelligence headquarters. It was happening. That night, Rotation 26, Holly sat with the cubs in the darkened containment bay. "Command is investigating him," she told them quietly. "They'll find the evidence. It's over." But Mika made a sound, low, troubled, uncertain. "What's wrong?" All three cubs moved to the observation window, staring out at the corridor beyond. Their body language screamed alert, protective, threatened. Holly's comm buzzed. A message from an unknown sender, routed through multiple relays. "You have something that belongs to me. Return it, or I'll make sure those creatures disappear permanently. You have 12 hours. Tyson." Desperate, cornered, and now openly threatening. Holly's blood ran cold. She pulled up the security feeds and found Tyson in the armory, accessing weapons under the pretense of routine inspection. He was signing out a plasma cutter, ostensibly for equipment maintenance, but the look in his eyes suggested other intentions. He was going to kill the cubs, going to destroy the evidence and claim they'd become aggressive, dangerous, that he'd had no choice. And he'd probably kill Holly too, if she got in his way. She had perhaps 6 hours before he made his move, maybe less. Holly pulled up the communication interface and began composing a message to Commander Phillips, attaching every piece of evidence she had, stolen or not, illegal or not, career-ending or not. She explained everything: the Cubs' intelligence, Tyson's trafficking operation, the threats, the danger. Her finger hovered over the send button. Then the lights went out, not just in containment, throughout the entire section of the ship. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Holly's datapad chimed with a priority alert. Unauthorized access detected in multiple systems. Security breach in progress. All personnel report to stations. Through the observation window, Holly saw Tyson approaching down the corridor, plasma cutter in hand, moving with purpose toward the containment bay. He was done waiting. The Cubs vocalized in unison, not fear, but something else. Something that sounded like readiness. "Listen to me," Holly said urgently, crouching beside them. "You three need to hide. He's coming, and he's dangerous, and I can't—" Mika placed a paw on Holly's hand. Then she looked at her brothers, and all three made a sound Holly had never heard before. Deep, resonant, almost like a horn call. And from Holly's datapad, from the wall panels, from every speaker in the containment section, that sound was amplified and broadcast. A call for help. A distress signal. Holly stared. "How did you—" The Cubs had accessed the ship's communication array. They'd been learning, watching, waiting. And now they were using everything they'd learned to sound an alarm that would bring the entire crew running. Tyson reached the containment bay doors. Through the window, Holly could see his expression, wild, desperate, beyond reason. He raised the plasma cutter, and then Commander Phillips appeared behind him, flanked by 4 security officers, weapons drawn. "Lieutenant Tyson," Phillips said coldly, "you're under arrest for trafficking in sentient beings, theft of military property, and about 15 other charges I'm still counting. Put down the weapon." Tyson turned, plasma cutter still raised, and for a moment Holly thought he might actually try to fight. Then his shoulders sagged. The weapon clattered to the floor, and Lieutenant Tyson, decorated officer, began to cry. Holly watched through the observation window as security escorted Tyson away, his hands bound, his face a mask of shock and defeat. Commander Phillips stayed behind, studying the containment bay with an expression that suggested he was rapidly reassessing everything he thought he knew about the situation. "Corporal Holly," he said through the intercom, "I'm coming in. Please don't let your charges eat me." Despite everything, Holly almost laughed. "They're not dangerous, sir." Phillips entered cautiously, datapad in hand, and stopped short when all 3 cubs turned to face him in perfect synchronization. "Those are not simple animals." "No, sir, they're not." "How long have you known?" Holly met his gaze. "Since rotation 9. Maybe earlier, but that's when I was certain." "And you didn't report it?" "I was gathering data, sir. Wanted to be absolutely sure before making claims that would sound improbable." Phillips looked at the cubs, then at Holly, then at his datapad displaying the emergency alert that had just been broadcast through the ship's communication system. "They called for help. They accessed our systems and called for help." "Yes, sir." "How?" Holly shook her head. "I honestly don't know the technical details, but they've been watching me work, learning our interfaces, understanding our technology. They're far more intelligent than anyone realized." Phillips was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Lieutenant Tyson broke into the containment section 3 hours ago, used an override code that should have been impossible for him to obtain. He was planning to kill them, wasn't he?" "Yes, sir. Because they knew what he'd done. Because they could expose him." Phillips looked at Mika, who gazed back with those unsettling, knowing eyes. "My question is, how did they know?" Holly explained about Keelani olfactory senses, about chemical traces, about how the cubs would have recognized the scent of their own people on Tyson. Phillips listened, his expression growing darker. "So when we confiscated them from that smuggling vessel—" "It wasn't a smuggling vessel, sir. It was Tyson's operation. He was arranging to sell them before official assessment could classify them as sentient. The cubs have been trying to tell us that, from the beginning. By stealing his personal effects and delivering them to you. Among other things, yes." Phillips rubbed his face. "This is going to be a nightmare of paperwork. Do you have any idea what the diplomatic ramifications are going to be when we inform the Keelani government that we've been holding 3 of their juveniles in containment?" "Actually, sir, I think they already know." Holly pulled up her datapad and showed him the transmission logs. "The Cubs' distress call wasn't just broadcast through our ship. They piggybacked onto our long-range communications array. That signal went out across Keelani space." Phillips stared. "When?" 30 minutes ago. And, sir, we're already receiving a response." The transmission came from a Keelani diplomatic vessel, and it was in flawless human standard language. "We acknowledge receipt of distress signal from our observers. Request immediate confirmation of their safety and permission to retrieve them. We await your response with gratitude for their protection." Observers. Holly read the word 3 times before its full meaning sank in. "They were never kidnapped," she whispered. "They were sent here. On purpose." Phillips made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "Let me get this straight. The Keelani government sent 3 of their juveniles, 3 incredibly intelligent, technologically sophisticated juveniles, to observe humanity's treatment of other species? It would appear so, sir. And we promptly threw them in a cage and assigned someone to babysit them as punishment. In our defense," Holly said weakly, "we thought they were confiscated cargo. Because Tyson told us they were confiscated cargo. Because he was trying to cover up his trafficking operation." Phillips closed his eyes. "This is either going to start an interstellar incident or I don't even know what." Mika chirped and padded over to Phillips, looking up at him with what could only be described as amusement. "Are you laughing at me?" Phillips asked the cub. Mika made a sound that was definitely affirmative. 2 hours later, Holly stood in the briefing room while Commander Phillips explained the situation to a hastily assembled group of senior officers. Tyson sat in the brig, still crying, having completely broken down when confronted with the full extent of his crimes and their consequences. "He's asking to see you," Phillips told Holly during a brief recess. "Keeps saying you're the only one who can help him." "Help him with what?" "He seems to think the cubs are still tormenting him somehow, that they're in his head, making the lights flicker in his cell, sending messages through the ventilation system." Phillips paused. "His lawyer thinks he's having a psychological breakdown." Holly thought about the past 10 rotations, about Tyson's escalating paranoia, about the systematic campaign of small malfunctions and inconveniences that had worn him down. Are the lights actually flickering in his cell? According to maintenance, everything's functioning normally. Then yes, he's having a breakdown. Holly felt no satisfaction in it, just exhaustion. "Do I have to see him?" "No, but he's insistent. Says he'll confess to everything if you tell the cubs to stop." Despite herself, Holly was curious. She made her way to the brig, where Tyson sat in his cell looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single night. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling, his uniform disheveled. "Holly," he said when he saw her, standing up so quickly he stumbled. "Holly, please, make them stop." "Make who stop?" "The cubs. I know you trained them. I know you're controlling them. The lights, the sounds, the messages." He pressed his hands against the force field barrier. "I'll confess to everything. Every transaction, every specimen, every law I broke. Just make them stop." Holly looked at him and felt something unexpected. Pity. He'd been so certain of his superiority, so confident in his untouchability, that being brought down by 3 juvenile aliens had shattered something fundamental in him. "I didn't train them, Tyson. I didn't control them. They acted on their own because they're intelligent, sentient beings who knew exactly what you'd done." "That's impossible." "No," Holly said quietly. "What's impossible is thinking you could sell sentient children and get away with it. What's impossible is believing you were smart enough to cover your tracks forever. What's impossible is expecting mercy after showing none." Tyson sank back onto his bunk. "I just wanted the money. The missions, the danger. The pay wasn't enough for what we risk out here. I wasn't hurting anyone." "You were selling people, Tyson. Children. To buyers who would have done things to them we can't even imagine." "I didn't know they were people. They looked like animals." "That's not an excuse. That's never been an excuse." Holly turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I don't think the cubs are tormenting you anymore. I think your own guilt is doing that just fine." She left him there, small and broken, and felt the weight of the past 30 rotations lift from her shoulders. The Keelani diplomatic vessel arrived on rotation 32, exactly when Holly's punishment detail was scheduled to end. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The Keelani ambassador was a massive, dignified creature, twice the size of the cubs, with the same intelligent eyes and golden fur that seemed to shift in the light. She thanked Commander Phillips formally, then turned to Holly. "You cared for our observers well, despite not knowing their true nature. This will be remembered." Holly glanced at the 3 cubs, who pressed close to the ambassador with obvious relief and affection. "They're remarkable. I'm sorry for how we treated them initially." "You treated them as you would treat any being in your care, with kindness, once you saw them clearly." The ambassador rested a paw on Mika's head. "They have reported favorably on your character. Humanity has much to learn, but also much to teach. Perhaps we might begin formal relations?" "I'd like that," Commander Phillips said. "Very much." As the Keelani prepared to depart, Mika broke away from her group and returned to Holly one last time. She bumped her head against Holly's hand, that familiar gesture of affection, and made a soft sound that needed no translation. "Goodbye. Thank you, friend." "Take care of yourself," Holly whispered. "And maybe go easier on the next species you observe." Mika's eyes glinted with unmistakable mischief, and Holly laughed despite the tears on her face. She watched through the viewport as the Keelani vessel departed, carrying 3 cubs who had somehow turned her punishment into the most important assignment of her career. Commander Phillips found her there an hour later. "You're being promoted to lieutenant and reassigned to head the new xenobiology intelligence division. Someone has to be our liaison to the Keelani, and apparently you've been personally requested." Holly blinked. "Requested? By whom?" Phillips smiled. 3 very insistent cubs who want to make sure their favorite human is involved in all future diplomatic relations. Congratulations, Holly. You've been adopted." Holly looked out at the stars, where the Keelani vessel had disappeared, and started laughing. 30 rotations ago, she'd been given babysitting duty as punishment. Now she was helping to forge the first diplomatic relationship between humanity and one of the most intelligent species in known space. All because 3 cubs had decided she was worth protecting. "I accept," Holly said, and somewhere in Keelani space, 3 juvenile observers chirped their approval.